Good evening. Thank you for joining me on the Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Ramses Khufu El Ra. Today's show is episode 33, the Ptolemaic Dynasty, Part 2. This is the final episode of this Pharaonic dynasties that I have presented from Dynasty 0 and to the Greco-Roman dynasty of the Ptolemies. Now, the show was supposed to air at 5 p.m. I had another technical issue, but I fixed that. Now we are live streaming and ready to continue this show. So I'm going to talk about the last dynasty of Kemet, and this is the Ptolemaic Dynasty, the Greco-Roman dynasty. This dynasty is not an indigenous dynasty, as I explained before in previous episodes, and the episode that was before this. At this period, Egypt is no longer known as Kemet. It is known as Egypt due to the Greek influence of this dynasty, this foreign dynasty. And those of you who say Cleopatra, oh, she's indigenous, no, she's not. She's Greek. She came from a Greek dynasty, which is the Ptolemaic dynasty, known during, at this time, the Greco-Roman period of ancient Egypt. So we're going to get into this. There's a lot of things going on here that shows that this dynasty is so inept. But the first pharaohs of this dynasty were good pharaohs. They built temples and stuff and followed, the guidelines of what Kemet was. The first pharaoh of this dynasty was Ptolemy I, who was a general under Alexander the Great. I explained how he came to power in episode 32, the Ptolemaic Dynasty Part 1, which I explained there. You can always go back and listen to that. I like to give a thanks to all those who have supported this channel from the beginning, from Dynasty 0 until now. Thank you for your support. Continue to hit those like buttons and share the video, and encourage others to subscribe as well. So let's get on into this show, which is the last and final episode, episode 33.
And 5 p.m. Pacific time.
Before we go, I'm going to
also
name the pharaohs of
that is it.
Of the
and,
last. I'm gonna name the pharaohs of the last pharaohs of this dynasty and the years that they reigned. Before we begin, and once again, let me say this: the Ptolemaic Dynasty was established in 305 to 330 BC.
Subscribe and hit the notification button so you know.
Ptolemy VIII, also known as Euergetes II, reigned 170 to 163 BC. He also reigned 145 to 116 BC. Ptolemy IX, also known as Soter II, reigned 116 to 110 BC. He also reigned 109 to 107 BC. And he also reigned 88 to 80 BC. Ptolemy X, also known as Alexander I, reigned 110 to 109 BC. He also reigned 107 to 88 BC. Ptolemy the 11th, also known as Alexander II, reigned 80 BC. And there was no cartouche for him. Ptolemy the 12th, also known as Dionysos Dionysos. He reigned 80 to 55 he reigned from 80 to 58 BC. Then he reigned a second time from 55 to 51 BC. Then after him you had Queen Berenice IV, who reigned 58 to 55 BC. There is no cartouche for her. Then you had the famous Queen Cleopatra VII, who reigned 51 to 30 BC. Then her son Ptolemy XV, also known as Caesarion, who reigned 36 to 30 BC. Okay, Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II, repulsive and nicknamed Phaeton Potbelly, was captivated by his niece, also Cleopatra, the daughter of his sister wife Cleopatra. The niece agreed to the liaison so long as she could also become queen. So mother and daughter, sister and niece of Euergetes became joint queens as Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III, generally differentiating as Cleopatra the sister and Cleopatra the wife. The former was much beloved by the people since her late husband Ptolemy VI reigned was such a shining example and memory compared to their present situation. Public resentment against Ptolemy VIII grew to such a point that he fled to Cyprus, taking the younger Cleopatra III, the wife, their two children, and the young boy Memphis, his son by Cleopatra II, with him. His flight was not a moment too soon, for the mob broke into the palace seeking his blood. In Cyprus, Euergetes plotted his return to Egypt, where his sister Cleopatra II reigned as Cleopatra Philomena Sotera. In a fit of maniac revenge against his sister and the Alexandrian mob, which had been busy destroying his statue and memories of him, he murdered his Memphis, his own son by Cleopatra II, and sent the child's dismembered body to her as a present on her birthday. See, this is the sick thing about the last dynasty, the Ptolemaic, which was not a indigenous dynasty. This is what these non-Kemetic people would do. This is not part of a Kemetic culture. They didn't do stuff like this. But we're gonna go further with this. In Cyprus, in 129 BC, now strong enough to invade Egypt, Euergetes returned from Cyprus, and in 128 BC, Cleopatra II fled for protection to her daughter Cleopatra Thea, now married to Demetrius II of Syria. Strangely, she was to return to Egypt, and Euergetes survived until 116 BC. What happened to his sister wife Cleopatra II after her return is not known, but she presumably predeceased him, as her daughter Cleopatra III inherited Egypt by Euergetes' will. Cleopatra III, now queen, mother, and regent for her two young sons, soon proved that she was as strong-willed as any of her ancestors. Although the younger son, Ptolemy X Alexander I, was her favorite, the two boys had, by popular pressure, to be seen to rule jointly with her. So the elder Ptolemy IX Soter II was associated with them. He began building the temple of Hathor at Dendera, to which many of his successors added, including Cleopatra VII below and several of the Roman emperors. In 106 BC, Ptolemy IX, whose nickname was Lathyrus Chickpea, fled to Cyprus because he had been accused of plotting to murder his mother. Since Cleopatra had always favored Ptolemy the Alexander, there is a strong possibility that the charge was false in an attempt to dispose of Ptolemy Soter. Cleopatra took her younger son Ptolemy Alexander to be her consort, and he may well have had a hand in her death at the age of 60 in 101 BC. Ptolemy X practiced the gross excess of his immediate forebears and was so huge that he was incapable of walking on his own without support. As with Ptolemy VIII, the Egyptians eventually turned against him. He fled but was killed at sea between Lycia and Cyprus. The older brother, Ptolemy IX, was therefore able to return and claim his throne, dying in 80 BC, age 62. Ptolemy IX had no legitimate male heir, so he left the throne to his daughter Berenice. She needed to have a male consort, and a nephew, Ptolemy XI Alexander II, was found to marry her, but Ptolemy disliked Berenice, who was older than him. Foolishly, he decided to reign alone and had her murdered within a month of their wedding. However, the queen had been a popular choice with the people, and he was lynched after a 19-day reign. This left a royal vacuum on the throne again. The only male descendants of Ptolemy I available, albeit illegitimate, were the sons of Ptolemy IX by an Alexandrian Greek concubine whose name is not even known. They were then living in safe exile at the court of Mithridates the Sixth of Pontus at Sinope. The eldest of the boys was proclaimed king as Ptolemy XII Neo Dionysos, and to complete the royal pair, he married his sister Tryphena. Rome was now the major factor in all Mediterranean politics, and Ptolemy XII sought to legitimize his rule not only by an Egyptian coronation but also with Roman approval. Like his predecessors, his habits were not to the liking of the populace. He earned the nickname Oletus, the flute player, and his heavy taxes and fawning attitude to Rome made history repeat itself. He fled to Rome, driven out of the country by the people. See, once again, Ptolemy II. This was Rome became a power. At this point, Egypt was weak. The greatness of Egypt was no longer under this delinquent dynasty, this delinquent Greco-Roman dynasty, the Ptolemaic Dynasty. This was the beginning where Rome was able to come in there and basically took charge of Rome. Even though you had pharaohs there, but the pharaohs were just, you might as well just call them puppets. They were basically puppets. And this dynasty, this weak dynasty, this foreign dynasty, this, what the Egyptologists would consider, this was the catalyst that the ancient Egyptians were of European bloodline, which was a lie, and I proved that this was a lie. The last dynasties were of European descent, who was foreign. They were not indigenous to this land. They came there when Alexander the Great came into Egypt. He conquered it, forced the Persians out, because the Persians was another foreign power that came in there and ruled Egypt. So from the Persians down into this delinquent dynasty, the Ptolemaic Dynasty, was nothing but foreigners. So the Egyptologists would love to say that the Egyptians were Europeans and they came down from Europe and cultivated Egypt from Dynasty 0. It's a lie. It's been proven that the ancient Egyptians, which I consider the ancient Kemites, they came from the south. They even told you where they came from. Even the first Greeks who visited had mentioned what they looked like. These were Negroid-looking people. Okay? So, at this point, Egypt was no longer, or Kemet, at this point, was no longer known as Kemet, but known as Egypt at this point. And the indigenous people was basically second class in their own nation. Now, when they talk about the populace, they're talking about the indigenous people. They're not talking about the Greeks who migrated from Greece and mainly lived in Alexandria, which Alexandria is a northern part of Egypt, also known in ancient Egypt as Lower Egypt, that part of Egypt at that time. Okay, so let's get into this. Once more, the throne of Egypt was vacant with only a female heir, Ptolemy XII's daughter Berenice. She needed a male consort and was married to a Cilician cousin. As strong-willed as her female forebears, she had him strangled within a week of their wedding and then took as her husband Archelaus, whom she knew as a friend from her exile at the court of Mithridates VI. They ruled for a brief period for 4 years. Ptolemy XII plotted in Rome to regain his throne. He needed two things initially to achieve this: recognition by the Roman Senate and an army. A large bribe to Julius Caesar, underwritten from Egyptian revenues, secured the first, and a similar large bribe to the proconsul of Syria, Gabinus, secured the use of his 3 legions. They marched on Alexandria, and in the conflict, Archelaus was killed, Berenice captured, imprisoned, and then murdered. Ptolemy XII had returned, but ruled Egypt only by virtue of the backing of the Roman legions. His second reign lasted just 4 years. History records that Ptolemy XII was neither valiant nor religious, despite the fact that he is so represented in the reliefs he completed on the temple pylons at Edfu and Philae. Cleopatra and the last of the Ptolemies. Egypt was bequeathed to Ptolemy XII's daughter Cleopatra VII, age 17, with the injunction that she should marry the elder of her 2 brothers, Ptolemy XIII. He, with the aid of ever-scheming palace courtiers, this time Pothinus and Achilles, attempted to dispose of her, but she was warned in time and fled to safety in Syria. However, Cleopatra was soon back with an army at the gates of Egypt at Pelusium, where a standoff between her and her brother took place. neither side being willing to make a move. Rome now entered the scene with Julius Caesar pursuing his defeated adversary Pompey after the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Pompey, seeking sanctuary with Ptolemy XIII, landed at Pelusium and was immediately assassinated by the conspirators Pontanus and Achilles, who were backing the Caesarian faction. When Caesar arrived at Alexandria and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he had Pontanus executed. Achilles met his death later at the hands of Arnesnu, Cleopatra's younger sister. Excuse me. At Alexandria, Caesar summoned the young king and queen before him. He favored the queen Cleopatra, as history and so many plays and novels recount. Ptolemy, with Achilles, unsuccessfully besieged the Romans on the Pharaohs island, and Ptolemy was drowned in the attack. In order to maintain the necessary dual rule of the throne, Cleopatra now married her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. She simultaneously became Caesar's mistress and bore him a son, Ptolemy XV Caesarion. Cleopatra is shown in a relief on the rear wall of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, presenting the young boy to the gods. It is the only relief of her in Egypt, although her beauty has been fabled. In literature, Cleopatra was above all things a very clever, intelligent, and political woman. She had to captivate two such men as Caesar and Antony in turn, and endeavor to use them to maintain her kingdom. She was said to be the only one of the Ptolemies who could understand and speak Egyptian. Egypt was now simply a rich pawn in the great struggle for power after Caesar's death between Octavian, Caesar's heir, and Antony. It came to head at Actium on the west coast of Greece on the afternoon of 2nd September 31 BC. The sea battle swung first to one way and then the other, when for some unaccountable reason, some say a mutiny, others say misunderstood orders, Antony broke off the engagement and sailed for the open sea after Cleopatra's ship and followed her to Egypt. Octavian was left master of the field. The following year, Octavian took the fight to Egypt and entered Alexandria on 1st August 30 BC. Cleopatra, as is well known, committed suicide rather than be an ornament in a Roman triumph. Antony fell on his sword, and Octavian had them buried together in the royal mausoleum in the Sema at Alexandria that Cleopatra had prepared. Roman Egypt. Although Rome conquered Egypt with the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, the country did not become a Roman province in the normal manner. Octavian, who became Augustus in 27 BC and the first emperor of Rome, took Egypt as his personal estate. It was ruled by a perfect answerable to the emperor, and no member of the imperial family or the Senate was allowed to visit the country without the express permission of Augustus. Egypt's production of vast quantities of grain was an important factor in the maintenance of the stability in Rome. give them bread and circus. Jovenel wrote, and Egypt provided the bread with the annual grain fleet that sailed from Alexandria. Successive Rome emperors after Augustus maintained the Pharaonic fiction, appearing in Egyptian dress on the reliefs of statues and carrying out the old rituals. Without the provisions of an identifying cartouche, they can rarely be recognized. From Augustus until the reform of the mint at Alexandria under Domitian in 294 AD, coinage was struck on the Greek model, mainly Traction, 4 traction pieces that bore the emperor's likeness as a Roman, and inscription identifying him around his head in Greek, and often with a reverse type that harked back to ancient Egyptian themes or deities. Roman Egypt was immensely prosperous, and many new cities were founded, especially in the Pharaonic area, with the classic Roman buildings of baths, basilica, and agora. Some temples were still built following the old plans. For example, Esna reflects the layout of the earlier Ptolemaic temple at Dendera and has several 1st century AD emperors represented in reliefs on its walls. One of the best known buildings in Egypt, Pharaoh's bed or Trajan's Caicos on the island of Pharaonic, was built by Trajan 98 to 117 AD and was intended to be a grand monumental entrance to the temple of Isis, but it was never finished. On Philae occurs the latest known firmly datable hieroglyphics inscription carved in 394 AD. Pompey's pillar at Alexandria has nothing to do with him, but was erected in the reign of Domitian 284 to 305 AD. Generally, however, Roman period monuments, apart from the sand-swept town cities, are few in Egypt. Although paying lip service to the old ideas and religions in varying degrees, Pharaonic Egypt had in effect died with the last native pharaoh, Ptolemy II, in 343 BC, 1,000 years before the rise of Islam and the fall of Egypt under its sway in 641 AD. So there you go, folks. There you have it. That is the end of today's show and the end of the episode, the Pharaonic episodes. I thank you for tuning in and supporting this Pharaonic episodes. If you want to hear other episodes, you can just go back and view other episodes from episode 1 and to episode 33, which is today. Once again, thank you for those who supported the show throughout its longevity for the past couple months. If any of you want to hear anything else about Kemet and other things regarding the true Kemites, I can do a special episode for that. Just let me know in the comment section and I will respond to that. And if I get enough response to that from my supporters, I will do another episode detailing. Most likely, I'll probably do an episode explaining the different cataracts of ancient Kemet and what do they mean. But let me know if you want me to do that. Once again, thank you for your support of the show. Please like the show, subscribe, and share. Have a blessed day and have a blessed week. Take care and God bless.